The Allied bombs are falling on Vector Prison in northern Germany. The men's section explodes. Everyone inside dies instantly. In the women's yard, 44-year-old Mona Parsons watches the flames and waits for the next bomb to find her. She weighs 94 pounds. Her hair has fallen out. Several teeth are missing. She's been a Nazi prisoner for 3 years and 5 months, sentenced to death, commuted to life at hard labour, 4 different camps, 12-hour factory shifts, solitary confinement, starvation rations. And now Allied bombs are killing the people trying to liberate her. The prison director throws open the gates and shouts, "You can take your chances with German bullets or Allied bombs." A 22-year-old Dutch baroness named Wendelian van Boetselaer grabs Mona's hand. They run. What follows is 78 miles on foot across Nazi Germany, 3 weeks through the front lines of a collapsing empire. Mona will pretend to be mentally disabled to hide her Canadian accent. She'll exchange labour for food in barns. She'll arrive at the Dutch border weighing 87 pounds, her feet covered in infected blisters, barely able to walk. The first Allied soldiers she encounters will be from her home province, the North Nova Scotia Highlanders. This is how a woman from a small Nova Scotia town became the only Canadian female civilian imprisoned by the Nazis. How she saved dozens of Allied airmen, how she faced a firing squad with such dignity that even the Nazi judge was moved, and how she walked to freedom when everyone thought it was impossible. This is the story of Mona Louise Parsons. Mona Louise Parsons was born February 17, 1901, in Middleton, Nova Scotia. Her father was a military officer. When she was 10, they moved to WOLFVILLE, a small university town in the Annapolis Valley. She was tall, striking, graceful. She loved performing. At Acadia Ladies Seminary, she excelled in music, painting, and theatre. She earned a certificate in elocution in 1920 and studied expression, what we'd call drama, in Boston. But her dream was New York, Broadway. In 1929, she landed a role as a chorus girl in the Ziegfeld Follies, one of the most prestigious theatrical revues in America. She wore elaborate costumes. She lived the glamorous life of a 1920s performer in Manhattan. But stardom remained elusive. The parts she wanted went to other women. Then her mother fell suddenly ill. Mona returned to WOLFVILLE. Her mother died shortly after. Grief reshaped everything. The theatrical career no longer seemed important. She enrolled in the Jersey School of Medicine and graduated cum laude in 1935 as a registered nurse. At 34, she was working in a Park Avenue medical office, the Broadway dream behind her. In February 1937, her brother introduced her to Willem Leonhardt, a Dutch millionaire businessman touring America. After a 5-month courtship, they married in September 1937. In the Netherlands. The next year, they built Ingleside, a magnificent estate near Amsterdam. Mona became a wealthy socialite in one of Europe's most cultured cities. For 2 years, she lived a life of extraordinary privilege. Then, on September 1st, 1939, their second anniversary, Germany invaded Poland. Britain and France declared war. The Netherlands declared neutrality. Willem urged Mona to return to Canada. She was a British subject. If Germany invaded, she'd be in danger. She refused to leave. In May 1940, Germany invaded the Netherlands. The country fell in 5 days. The Nazis occupied Holland. Mona and Willem decided to fight back. Through Willem's cousin, they joined a small Dutch resistance network. Their role was specific and dangerous. Hyde Allied airmen shot down over occupied Holland RAF bombers flying missions over Germany often crashed in the Netherlands. Surviving crews needed to evade capture. If they could reach the coast, fishing boats would take them to British submarines, smuggling them back to England. But first, they needed places to hide. Ingleside was perfect. The large estate, long driveway, surrounding trees, all provided cover. Mona dismissed their servants, claiming financial difficulties. The real reason, to use servants' quarters to house airmen without witnesses. She created an emergency hiding place behind the master bedroom closet. The system worked like a network of safe houses. Airmen moved from contact to contact, staying hours or perhaps one night before moving on. From Ingleside, they were transported to Leiden on the coast for extraction. The risk was enormous. The Nazis executed resistance members. Every German checkpoint could be their last. For over a year, they went undetected. Dozens of Allied airmen escaped through their network. Then September the 19th, 1941, everything collapsed. That evening, Mona and Willem drove to Amsterdam for dinner with family friends, the Brouwers. As they prepared to leave, the Brouwers made an urgent request. 2 British airmen needed transport immediately. Flight engineer William Jock Moyer and navigator Richard Pape, RAF bomber crew, climbed into Willem's car for the drive to Laren. They passed several German checkpoints Willem's upper-class credentials got them through. They reached Ingleside safely. The airmen stayed 6 unprecedented days. Something had gone wrong with the extraction network. Finally, arrangements were made. Moyer and Paper left for Leiden and the fishing boats. They never made it. A couple in Leiden, collaborators who'd infiltrated the network, betrayed them to the Gestapo. The Germans recovered Paper's diary and traced the network backward. 10 days later, September 29th, the Gestapo came to Ingleside. Mona was arrested. Willem went into hiding. He'd be captured 3 months later, the day before Mona's trial. Mona spent 3 months in Wetteringschans prison in Amsterdam. A cold cell, straw bedding, a bucket for a toilet. The Gestapo interrogated her repeatedly. What did she know? Who were her contacts? How many airmen had she hidden? She gave them nothing. She feigned boredom. She asked for cigarettes to buy time. She stared steadily back at her interrogators. Her composure infuriated them, but they couldn't break her. On December the 22nd, 1941, she stood trial before a Nazi military tribunal at the Carlton Hotel in Amsterdam. Her defense counsel was a young German soldier who spoke neither Dutch nor English. They couldn't communicate. The prosecuting attorney was everything Nazi propaganda portrayed. Cold, arrogant, filled with contempt, Mona later described him. He typified the arrogant Nazi officer seen in Hollywood movies. Stringy, colourless hair, heavy, thick glasses. He seemed so full of hate. His immediate target was me. The trial was conducted in German. Mona couldn't understand most proceedings, but when the verdict came, she understood perfectly. Guilty of treason. Sentenced to death by firing squad. Everyone expected her to break down. Women facing execution were supposed to sob, plead for mercy. Collapse. Mona Parsons had been an actress. She knew exactly what performance to give. She stood erect. When a soldier came to take her arm, she shook off his hand. She turned to face the judge and prosecutor. She clicked her heels together, bowed formally, and said clearly, "Guten Morgen, Meine Herren." "Good morning, gentlemen." Then she walked out, head high, back straight. The tribunal officials stared, mouths open, stunned. After a moment, they returned her greeting. The chief judge followed her out. "Dear lady," he said, "you have great courage. Enter an appeal. I will recommend it." Her sentence was commuted to life in prison at hard labour. In early January 1942, while awaiting transport, Mona saw 3 male prisoners at a railway station. One had dyed his hair as a disguise. It was Willem. A few minutes together. An embrace, brief words, then the guards wrenched them apart. They wouldn't see each other again until June 1945. On March 6, 1942, Mona was transported to Anrath Penitentiary in the Rhineland. She remained there over 2 years. She slept on straw. She shared a tiny, freezing cell with 3 other inmates. She worked 12-hour shifts making aircraft parts and bomb components. Whenever possible, she sabotaged her work. She knitted socks for German soldiers with deliberate holes. She damaged assembly line components. Small resistance, but resistance nonetheless. Her weight dropped to 94 pounds. Her hair fell out from malnutrition or repeated shaving. Several teeth fell out. She suffered bronchitis, night sweats, persistent coughing, diarrhea. She was placed in solitary confinement for 2 weeks. To maintain sanity, she recited Shakespeare. She sang quietly to herself. She remembered scenes from plays at Acadia University. Her theatrical training, memorizing lines, inhabiting characters, became her survival mechanism. In September 1944, as Allied forces advanced, the Germans moved her to Wiedenbrück, then in February 1945 to Vechta prison near the Dutch border. At Vechta, she met Wendelin van Boetzelaer. Wendelin was 22, a Dutch baroness arrested for resistance activity. She'd escaped German prisons twice before. She was in solitary confinement when Mona arrived. Mona smuggled a cooked potato to Wendelin's cell, risking severe punishment. When Wendelin saw a hand poke through her door holding a potato, she knew she'd found a friend. The prison director, unusual for showing compassion, eventually moved Wendelin out of solitary. Together, they began planning escape. They scraped together extra clothing. They rehearsed their cover story. Wendelin spoke perfect German. She could pass as a German citizen. But Mona had a distinctive Canadian accent. If she spoke, she'd be identified immediately. Mona proposed a performance. She would pretend to be Wendelin's mentally disabled aunt with a speech impediment from a cleft palate. Wendelin would do all the talking. They were refugees from Dusseldorf, fleeing Allied bombing, heading east to find family. No papers, everything lost in the bombing. All they needed was an opportunity. It came March 24th, 1945. Without warning, Allied aircraft filled the sky. Bombs fell. The men's prison exploded. Everyone inside died. More bombs fell, targeting the nearby airfield and rail junction. The prison director threw open the gates. "You can take your chances with German bullets or Allied bombs." Wendelin grabbed Mona's hand. They ran through smoke and explosions toward a forest. They dove into military pillboxes to rest. Once certain they weren't followed, they stripped off everything marking them as prisoners and buried it. Then they began walking 78 miles toward the Dutch border. For 3 weeks, they walked across Nazi Germany through the final, chaotic weeks of the Third Reich's collapse. The countryside was devastated, rotting livestock, destroyed vehicles, corpses amid ruins, survivors as thin and ragged as Mona herself, German military units retreating everywhere. Allied forces advancing from both sides, artillery bombardments constantly, battles erupting without warning. Their cover story held. Mona played her role perfectly. Years of theatrical training served her well. She adopted mannerisms of a mentally disabled woman. She avoided eye contact. She never spoke. When people addressed her, Wendelin explained about her aunt's cleft palate. People believed it. Mona's acting saved their lives repeatedly. They walked during daylight. Their shoes disintegrated on frozen roads. Soon they walked barefoot, feet developing infected blisters. They were constantly cold in thin prison clothing. They survived by offering labour for food and shelter. They stopped at farms, worked for a meal and straw to sleep on, chopping wood, cleaning stables, hauling water. German farmers, desperate for help, accepted. At one farm, they sheltered 3 days while a battle raged nearby. The farmer went to investigate and was killed by artillery. They huddled in the barn, listening to explosions, waiting. They covered 78 miles in 3 weeks. about 3 to 4 miles per day, walking barefoot with infected feet, weighing under 90 pounds, in freezing weather, through a war zone, constantly terrified of discovery. Near the town of Reed, close to the Dutch border, they were separated. Accounts differ on exactly how. Mona continued alone. Mona reached the Dutch border in early April 1945. Alone, filthy, skeletal, her feet masses of infected wounds, missing 2 toenails, barely able to walk. She crossed near Vlagtwedde. She dropped her act. She approached a Dutch farm and spoke in English. "I'm Canadian. I need to find Allied troops." The farmer, convinced by something in her voice, helped wash and bandage her feet. Then he transported her on a truck to find Allied soldiers. She approached soldiers loading supplies. Her story spilled out. Canadian, Nazi prisoner for nearly 4 years, escaped, walked across Germany, needed help getting word to her father in Nova Scotia. The soldier looked sceptical. "What part of Nova Scotia?" "WOLFVILLE, in the Annapolis Valley." His expression changed completely. "I'm from Halifax. I'm with the North Nova Scotia Highlanders." Of all the Allied units advancing through Northern Europe, American, British, Canadian, from dozens of regions, the first soldiers Mona encountered were from her home province. Clarence Leonard stared at this woman weighing 87 pounds, missing teeth and hair, feet wrapped in bloody bandages. But she was from Nova Scotia Wolfville. She was theirs. Mona was taken to Canadian Army Rear Headquarters. Intelligence officers verified her story. It seemed so unbelievable they had to confirm she wasn't a spy. Several North Nova Scotia Highlanders officers had attended Acadia University. They knew Mona Parsons. Some had performed in theatrical productions with her in the 1920s. Mona Parsons, actress, nurse, resistance fighter, Nazi prisoner, escapee, was finally safe. By late May 1945, Mona made it back to Ingleside. Her home had survived, though Holland was devastated. Willem returned in June. American forces had liberated him, but his health was permanently destroyed. He would never fully recover. Mona stayed by his side, nursing him through his final years. In late 1945, she received commendations from General Dwight D. Eisenhower and Air Chief Marshal Lord Arthur Tedder, expressing gratitude for her role helping Allied airmen escape. Canadian authorities ignored her. She received no recognition from her own government. Willem died in April 1956. Under Dutch law, his biological son, whose existence Mona hadn't known about, was entitled to 3/4 of the estate. Mona received nothing. Years of legal battles failed to change the outcome. In December 1957, she returned to Nova Scotia. She reconnected with Harry Foster, a childhood friend from Wolfville who'd become Major General Harry Foster. They married in 1959. They had 5 years together before cancer claimed him in 1964. Mona moved back to Wolfville in 1970. She lived there quietly for 6 years. She rarely spoke about her wartime experiences. The trauma never left her. Nightmares for the rest of her life. She kept in touch with Wendelian van Butzelaar. Their friendship, forged in a Nazi prison and tested during that desperate walk across Germany, lasted until Mona's death. On November 28, 1976, Mona Parsons died of pneumonia at age 75. She is buried in Willowbank Cemetery in Wolfville. Her gravestone reads simply, Mona Parsons, wife of Major General Harry Foster. No mention of her extraordinary courage, her resistance work, her years in Nazi prisons, her dramatic escape, or her commendations. For decades, she remained largely unknown. But in 2000, historian Andria Hill-Lehr published a comprehensive biography. Mona Parsons, From Privilege to Prison, From Nova Scotia to Nazi Europe. A Heritage Minute featured her story in 2005. On May 5, 2017, Liberation Day in the Netherlands, a statue was unveiled outside the WOLFVILLE post office. The statue is titled "The Joy is Almost Too Much to Bear," showing Mona dancing in Dutch wooden clogs despite her emaciated condition. In 2024, Canada Post issued a commemorative stamp featuring Mona Parsons slowly. Finally, Canada is remembering her. Look again at that moment in the courtroom on December the 22nd, 1941. A 40-year-old woman stands before Nazi judges who've just sentenced her to death. She's been imprisoned 3 months, interrogated repeatedly. She knows what awaits her: a firing squad, a wall, a volley of bullets, death far from home. Everyone expects her to break down. Instead, Mona Parsons clicks her heels together, bows formally, and says, "Guten Morgen, Meine Herren." In that moment, she took everything the Nazis tried to take from her: her dignity, her agency, her humanity, and claimed it back. She turned her death sentence into a performance of such grace that even the Nazi judge was moved. That moment defines who Mona Parsons was. She refused to be diminished. Even facing execution, she remained the actress, the nurse, the small-town girl from WOLFVILLE who danced in the Ziegfeld Follies. She saved lives. She resisted evil. She survived the unsurvivable. She walked across Germany when walking seemed impossible. She came home. And when she came home, she didn't demand recognition. She lived quietly, worked as a nurse, remarried, and spent her final years in the town where she was born. The world forgot her. But the Allied airmen who escaped Holland never forgot the couple who risked everything to hide them. The North Nova Scotia Highlanders who found her near the Dutch border never forgot the skeletal woman who said she was from WOLFVILLE Wendelian van Betzelaer. Never forgot the woman who smuggled her a potato. Now, finally, Canada is remembering her too. The best memorial to Mona Parsons isn't bronze or paper or film. It's the lesson her life teaches, that ordinary people can do extraordinary things. That courage isn't the absence of fear, it's choosing to act despite fear. That dignity can't be taken unless we surrender it. That resistance matters, even when it seems futile. That walking 78 miles begins with a single step. Mona Parsons, Broadway chorus girl, trained nurse, Dutch millionaire's wife, resistance fighter, Nazi prisoner, escapee, survivor, proved all of this. She clicked her heels and said good morning to the men who sentenced her to death. She ran through Allied bombs toward freedom. She walked barefoot across Germany. She came home, and her story, silent for so long, finally speaks to us across the decades, reminding us what human beings are capable of when they refuse to surrender their humanity. That's the legacy of Mona Louise Parsons, the Canadian woman who outsmarted the Nazis and saved Allied pilots. The woman from WOLFVILLE who danced in wooden clogs when she was finally free. Good morning, gentlemen, indeed.